pleasure for me to host our first virtual Vibrant Virginia Summit. I understand from the organizers that there are over 300 individuals from across the Commonwealth of Virginia and around the nation that are joining us this morning. I hope all our participants and audience members will be patient with us as we all begin to navigate and build on our skill sets in terms of how to best use this technology platform in a seamless manner. And I'm particularly grateful for the leadership of Virginia Tech for joining us. Both President Tim Sands and Provost Cyril Clarke have taken the time to join us. Before I begin, let me just send out really heartfelt gratitude to 4 institutions in the Commonwealth of Virginia that have played a tremendous role in launching this summit. Virginia State University, the University of Virginia, the University of Virginia Wise, and my colleagues here at Virginia Tech, both in the Office of Economic Development and Continuing and Professional Education, have played a yeoman's role in bringing this first virtual summit to you. As some of you might be aware, we were originally planning to be all together in person in Richmond this June, but that wasn't to be. So thank you all for taking the time to join us in this virtual setting. I also want to recognize the extraordinary efforts of Dr. Ann Kademian, a presidential fellow at Virginia Tech that has played a leadership role in organizing and doing extraordinarily hard work for this summit. As most of you know, American higher education has always had a significant role in providing service to our nation, both in terms of providing graduates, students who will engage and elevate their own lives to the service of their nation, to the service of their professions, and to maximize their own talents and skills throughout their careers. And the role of universities in advancing new knowledge, in emphasizing that in the context of economic development, the focus of research universities on scientific discovery and technological innovation has been the vanguard of American higher education for the last 2.5 centuries. And so this summit really brings us all together in the Commonwealth of Virginia to explore the role of higher education, where we can lift and strengthen the university's role to develop a more vibrant and robust Virginia that begins to look at how deeper and how wider and how more ubiquitous our understanding of higher education's role in bridging the divides and advancing shared prosperity towards a more flourishing Virginia. And so this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing first President Tim Sands, the 16th President of Virginia Tech, a native of the most diverse state in the nation. He joined us in June 2014 and has in 6 short years developed and executed some of the most ambitious and lofty goals of Virginia Tech during his tenure at Virginia Tech. So without further ado, President Sands, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Guru. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and for giving me the opportunity to welcome you. Today's summit is part of a broader statewide effort to collaboratively strengthen the role of higher education in addressing disparities and building on opportunities across the urban and rural continuum. The focus is on the role of higher education in addressing statewide challenges, working collaboratively. And it's wonderful to have so many representatives of our sister institutions on this Zoom webinar. The Vibrant Virginia focus aims to reframe the discussion from rural or urban to interconnections, collaboration, and the urban-rural continuum. In some ways, the discussion and perhaps our opportunities have already been reframed by COVID-19. Rural regions may be reopening sooner than urban districts. teleworking has proven to be effective in business and education settings. There's a great incentive to expand our capacity for distance learning and teleworking by upgrading technology, regulations, bandwidth, and access. There may be more potential for urban-rural workforce collaboration as companies and employees consider the benefits of work environments that are less dense, for example. Our goal today is a deeper understanding of higher education's current and potential role in bridging divides and advancing shared prosperity in Virginia. Our first panel discussion will focus on the critical economic challenges and opportunities in Virginia. The second discussion will bring together a diverse mix of institutions to discuss the role of higher education in bridging divides and advancing shared prosperity as a partner. It's also important to talk about creating stronger networks and relationships around shared areas of interest, from health to civic leadership to entrepreneurship to youth. We need to understand what gaps or needs exist and what may be possible in Virginia. And we need to identify funder connections and resources that can support the creation or expansion of impactful initiatives. As Virginia reopens, rebuilds, and rethinks its approach to education, economic resilience, and growth, we have an opportunity and an obligation to include all parts of the Commonwealth in order to ensure a more prosperous and resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sands. It now is a privilege for me to introduce my boss, Provost Cyril Clarke, a native of South Africa, a trained veterinarian who has spent the majority of his career here in the United States in land-grant university. And I can think of no better individual that deeply understands the commitment and the value of land-grant universities in serving communities, both here in the state as well as in communities around the world. And so without further ado, let me turn things over to Dr. Clarke.
Thanks, Guru. I'm just making final arrangements here to get my video working. Thanks for your patience. I so very much appreciate this opportunity really to make a few opening comments and of course to express my appreciation for our colleagues who have worked so hard to work on this initiative and to convene what I see now is a gathering of over 170 individuals and a legal one at that. And so thanks to all of you who have taken the time and committed your attention to this very, very important mission. You know, I have such difficulty thinking about anything these days other than the crises with which we are dealing. And so rather than resist that, I thought perhaps I would talk about the crises that are affront us right now and perhaps use those to reflect, I think, on the importance of this summit. And of course, the first of those really has to do with COVID-19. And as is true for so many of my colleagues at other academic institutions, we are now very much engaged in trying to figure out how to deliver as much as possible, taking into account the importance of mitigating health risk, how to really offer to students an in-person fall. And you know, a number of people have contacted me and said, you know, why don't we just do this online? Why don't we just continue online? It's so much easier. We wouldn't have to fuss and figure out all of the details around how to apply public health measures. What does it mean to physically distance in the classroom? How do we figure out how to enforce these measures? How do we do all of this within the constraints of budget and faculty numbers and space? And some have even suggested that the primary justification for academic institutions really paying so much time and attention to an in-person fall has to do with budgetary and financial matters. And while let me acknowledge that financial resources are important, they're wrong. And they're wrong because it is worth committing our time to bringing our institutions back into a situation, a position where we can do our task. Because the work that we do is not trivial. The work that faculty do is not trivial in advancing the intellectual development and character of students, enabling them to pursue their aspirations, to engage in the economy, to serve their communities. This is important work. It's important enough for us to go the extra mile in bringing our universities back into a state where we can fully meet the expectations of our communities. You know, all of these functions, these important mission areas, they are connected in one way or the other, often directly, to economic impact and development. And so when you think about the importance of universities and our impact on the economy of the state and of the nation, I think that connects directly with what I very much hope to be a substantive outcome of this vibrant initiative. So the other crisis that, of course, is engaging so much of our concern and time and attention has to do with another disease. It's a disease that has afflicted our nation now for far longer than COVID-19. It's a chronic disease that has periodic flare-ups, and we're addressing and recognizing a severe one at this time. It's a disease that actually has a greater impact and causes more damage to our community than COVID-19. And it's a disease that arises from the inadequacy of our attitude and our attempts in terms of creating an equal opportunity and equal justice for all Virginians, irrespective of race, ethnicity, and other identities. And you know, there are a lot of strategies, there are a lot of remedies that we not only need to think about, we need to implement. But if one of those outcomes, if one of those approaches is not to make sure that economic opportunities are available to all citizens of the state, then I'm quite sure that we will fail. And so here too, that second crisis is connected, I think, with economic impact, economic development, which has everything to do with what our universities accomplish in partnership with the communities whom we serve. And I'm delighted to see that the scope of interest has now broadened from a focus previously possibly on rural communities to acknowledge that there are urban communities also that desperately need our help. You know, when you think about it, it is not so much the distance between the urban location and the rural location that's of concern now. It is, in fact, the distance between the individual Virginian and the opportunity and access to education, to health care, to economic activity, and to justice. And in so many ways, all of those, again, are intertwined with economic development. And that's what institutions like ours do in partnership with communities. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share a few comments. And I would encourage you, as you think through the complexity of how to address really as a very urgent need, that you include amongst those important outcomes, driving the economy of our Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Clarke. Your comments remind us about some of the crises of the 20th century that brought women wholly into the workforce and provided them a full measure to engage in the development and the expansion of the 20th century American dream at the time, and also higher education's role in both research and discovery that today we take for granted in terms of the development of FM radio, the development of the pap smear procedure, and even the development of the barcode that has enabled us to expeditiously make our way through the grocery lines on a daily basis. All of these inventions and the social movements that came in the 20th century came in large part to both crises that we faced during those last 100 years, but also higher education's role in the advancement of technology and the discovery process. And I think I want to share my gratitude and extend my deep thanks to both President Stans and Provost Clarke for taking a chunk of their Friday morning to join us today, and I hope they will stay for as long as they can. Let me now pivot to our first of two panels this morning. We have the opportunity to welcome Mr. Thomas Barkin, the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Mr. Stephen Moret, the President and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and Christy McFarland, the Director of Research for the National League of Cities. The three of them will be joining me for the next 35 to 45 minutes to go through some questions that I'll be posing to them. And then I will ask them to limit their responses to a tight 3 to 4 minutes. Following that, we will encourage questions from the audience. And Mr. Leland Shelton will be reading out the questions once the panel has had a chance to respond to the questions that I will be posing to them. So without further ado, if I may pose the first question to Christy. Christy, from a statewide as well as from a national level, could you please speak to us about as you look forward over the next year, what are the critical challenges that the Commonwealth of Virginia and we indeed as a nation are going to be facing as we begin to embark on the recovery process in all its manifestations?
Great. Well, thank you, Guru. I'm very excited to be here and appreciate the invitation. Thank you, President Sands, Provost, Clarke, and all of the organizers. Well, from a national economic perspective, despite gains in employment over the past month, we know that the good news is not broadly shared. And we've clearly heard some of this from our introductions this morning. We know that Black Americans, particularly Black women, actually saw unemployment increase. Small businesses continue to suffer. Parts of the country and areas within states that are most reliant on sectors such as tourism, international trade, and energy have been hit the hardest and will continue to be challenged. This is especially true for rural communities. While other parts of the economy, again, started adding jobs in the past month, one sector in particular, the state and local government sector, continued to shed jobs at a record pace. This is primarily the result of significant revenue losses and unanticipated expenditures that state and local governments across the country have been incurring in just the past few months. So we know the government sector is not rebounding like other parts of the economy, which has significant consequences for recovery, both in the short and long term. In the short term, we know local governments, cities, states as well, obviously are on the front lines of what we call reopening and those different phases that we're all experiencing right now. With the massive amounts of municipal layoffs and furloughs, as well as at the state level, reopening is going to be stifled because it's those frontline workers who are there to sort of reopen streets, reissue permits, do all of the things that are required to actually have that reopening happen. Over the longer term, thinking at a more national level, we know that upwards of 10% of GDP loss over the next year will come from spending cuts from state and local governments as they try to balance their budgets. In particular, we're also seeing that in addition to the layoffs and furloughs, one of the key ways that local governments and state governments are responding to fiscal stress is to pull back on capital projects and infrastructure projects, which of course will have ramifications for broader economic recovery, particularly when it comes to securing relationships between urban and rural parts of the state. It will have ramifications for private sector contracts, regional development. In Virginia, we're already starting to see revenue losses from vehicle taxes, gas taxes, license fees, and those certainly will have consequences for priority projects around roads, bridges, and public transit.
Thank you, Christy. Steve, would you like to add on to Christy's comments from your vantage point?
I would just say, first of all, I agree with everything Christy said, which is not surprising. I'm a big fan of her work and her organization as well. Obviously, this has had a huge impact on the Commonwealth and nationwide, and that impact has been highly variable by sector, by state, by region, mostly because of differences in economic structure. One place that Virginia has been relatively fortunate is in the structure of our economy. We have a very large sort of overweighted connection to the federal government that's been helpful to us. We also have a disproportionately large fraction of our employment base associated with professional office occupations that can be performed remotely. So Virginia has been running about 5 to 6 percentage points better in terms of job losses versus the U.S. overall. One of the states that's been impacted the least, but still very much a devastating effect. And that effect really has varied quite a bit across the regions of the Commonwealth. As Christy said, those that have a greater weight in particularly the hospitality sector, but also retail, have been more impacted than others. So it's a very wide-ranging impact across the Commonwealth. In general, small businesses much more heavily and much more sensitive to the impacts than large businesses. In general, folks that have less than a college degree have faced much higher unemployment impacts than those that do have a college degree. And there have also been disproportionate impacts for people of color as well. So this is something that's had a tremendously negative impact on Virginia and the country, but it's an impact that's been even more hardly or harshly felt by certain sectors and certain types of individuals.
Thank you, Steve. Tom, you bring a unique lens from the banking sector, and I wonder how you would look at what we are facing now and provide your insight as well.
Yeah, so I agree completely with what's been said. I might just add a couple of points. One is the labor market over the last 30 years. We've all been talking about the hollowing out of middle-class jobs. And what we don't talk about is that there's been big growth at the high end, think tech jobs, cognitive jobs. There's also been really big growth at the low end in terms of personal contact service jobs. And the tragedy of this health crisis is that it's gone disproportionately, as Stephen just said, after the low end, after the people who hold those lower end service jobs, who happen to be disproportionately people of color, women, people without a college education. And so that group's been hit really hard. And I think one of our real challenges, which I hope is relevant to today's forum, is how do we get those people back in the workforce? And in many cases, they will be back in jobs that they had before as those businesses come back. But in many cases, they won't. I think there are jobs that'll go away here. And so the question of retraining is an interesting one. Earlier, the provost was talking about bringing people back on campus. My daughter's a junior in college. I've been intrigued with how much she's been able to get out of online learning. And I would agree with the provost. We'd like her out of the house and back on campus. But I think there's a opportunity to extend what's been innovated in online learning into retraining. I think there's a real opportunity to take the group that is being disproportionately affected and getting them back in the workforce. So I'd put that on the table as well.
Thank you, Tom. My second question is sort of dovetails very closely with your response, Tom. I've always looked at individuals and their earning capacities as small business that as they make their trajectory through the lifespan of an individual or the lifespan of a company, is their livelihoods and their income levels grow correspondingly, and they're able to become much more robust in their earning capacity, in their spending capacity, and then the sort of the creation and the supply of money flows within themselves and into the economy at large. And I wonder, in that context, universities at its very core our mission is about maximizing the capacity development of each individual that come into our institutions to help them grow to their fullest potential and capacity, whatever their field may be. And I wonder, as we are facing this crisis in 2020, which both President Sands and Provost Clarke sort of reminded us of, the very ideals of our nations are being challenged. And as we begin to create a new covenant for higher education and its role in educating civil society, Tom, if you don't mind me starting with you, do you envision that role expanding? Do you see federal assistance and federal leadership over the next several years in providing the kind of 21st century GI Bill or a National Defense Education Act kind of a stimulus engagement that would propel universities across the Mid-Atlantic and beyond to engage in that role?
Well, I'm pretty far away from being able to predict what the federal government will do in terms of stimulus, but I do think there are 2 or 3 pretty significant investments that would really pay off here. One is, community colleges play a critical role in helping people transition into new careers. I've been struck as I've been talking to community colleges in Virginia and outside, the power of for-credit programs and partnerships with employers, but also the challenges of funding those programs. Pell Grants, for example, don't go to credit programs, they only go to degree programs. And I could imagine, one very straightforward thing that could happen here would be to change the funding model to allow equal funding for programs that get people into the workforce. Another place which you don't necessarily directly think of as education, but I would think of as education, is broadband funding. The president talked earlier about some of the issues in smaller towns. I would say every one of them requires technology to make it operational. And as so many kids have been sent home, both from K-12 and also from colleges, it's become incredibly clear the power, value, and necessity of this utility. And so again, it's a place I think there's bipartisan support, and you could imagine a significant increase in funding there. The third thing I just put on the table, which isn't so much a federal stimulus program, but I just think is a collective imperative, is graduation rates. And of course, this differs, massively by school. And of course, the metrics are complicated in many cases, particularly when you get to the community colleges. But, all life outcomes are better with a college degree: better health, better wealth, better income, better resiliency in a downturn. If you have a college degree right now, your unemployment is 7.4%. If you only have a high school degree or less, it's 20%, just as you said. And I've just been struck when I see numbers that suggest less than half the people who enter four-year institutions actually graduate with a degree. And that's somewhat on the student and that's somewhat on the institution, but I just would put that on the table as well.
Thank you, Tom. Steve, you straddle both higher education as well as the private sector, and at the state level, and you bring some unique lens to this question that I posed to Tom. I wonder if you would chime in to see if there's a statewide impetus or federal impetus that would help higher education play a more inclusive role in some of the thinking that Tom shared with us.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question. And first of all, I really vigorously agree with what Tom Barkin said. I think, VDP, as you know, has been a champion of ubiquitous broadband access in the Commonwealth for several years. And we think there was a great case for it before the pandemic, but it's now more obvious than ever that if the United States is going to take its place or keep its place as one of the most economically important countries in the world, we have got to get broadband to everybody. And by the way, not just the physical access to broadband, but economically viable access to broadband as well. Essential for work, essential for education, for social connectivity, and for healthcare. I just can't agree strongly enough on that. And also essential for access to higher education. When we think about the recovery of Virginia from the COVID-19 pandemic, and for that matter, the recovery of the country as a whole, higher education is going to play an absolutely central role in that. In terms of not just recovery in general, but also recovery in a way that is inclusive and equitable as well. In that sense, I think really give great credit to what the Commonwealth has been doing under the governor's leadership and Megan Healy as well. I think the new G3 initiative is particularly well designed and will be very well positioned to help the economy recover, along with Fast Forward. And of course, the great things that Virginia Tech and Radford and UVA-Wise and so many other institutions are doing with the Tech Talent Investment Program to really build that pipeline as well. So I really think higher education has a central role. I think funding will be really critical there. I think also thinking about continuing to strengthen the bonds between higher education and the private sector. One of the things that's very clear when you look at differences in employment outcomes for graduates, for those that do complete, the amount of experiential learning that they've had, formal internships, research related to industry during their undergraduate experience is very, very important. And there's still quite a wide range in terms of some students not getting nearly enough of those opportunities. And I think sometimes, therefore, not having the kinds of opportunities to launch as they finish. The other piece I think will be very important is for institutions to continue to encourage broad-based digital literacy and quantitative reasoning of their grads. Certainly the classic things we think of as really essential for higher education, critical thinking, the ability to write well and communicate well, those are absolutely foundational. But I think as we think about where we're at in the 21st century, digital literacy, and this is a place that Virginia Tech has been a leader with Tim Sands' leadership. This is a place that William and Mary is also doing some really interesting things. I think that's something that really should be embraced across all fields. And likewise, while perhaps not everyone needs to learn multivariate calculus, I do think getting to a baseline level of quantitative reasoning, to me, in the 21st century is essential for all of our grads as well.
Thank you, Steve. Christy, your thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, you know, broadband critical, the flexibility that Tom had mentioned in terms of Pell Grants, I think there are a lot of avenues for the federal government where funding is available to ensure that there's flexibility to meet state and local needs. And mention is, you know, one thing I've been hearing from a nationwide perspective is that given a lot of the fiscal challenges that cities are facing and that states are facing, universities are facing massive budget cuts that may not necessarily, for example, Rutgers University just got a 50% slashed funding from the state. University of Illinois and University of Illinois facing similar challenges. So thinking about sort of in the shorter term, what does federal stimulus look like for states in particular, so that they are able to continue to fund education at a level that's going to be required to help continue to provide economic stimulus, continue to help close the gaps, particularly in terms of disproportionate impact. So all of those will be critically important. And again, that's a shorter term challenge, which will have longer term ramifications.
Guru, if I could just add to what Christy shared there, because she mentioned it earlier and I forgot to reinforce it. Our congressional leaders, and I would give great credit to our delegation for what they've done so far. I think the scale and broadly the design of what they've done has been really constructive and at the right level. I think the one piece that has been missing, and if it's not addressed, I think would create a risk of a deeper, longer recession, is support, flexible support for states and localities. It may not be totally obvious to folks on Main Street right now, but if the states and localities don't get some additional support, flexible support from the federal government, we're going to see more layoffs. We're going to see cuts to higher education at the very time that its role has never been more essential for the future of our country, our economic vitality, and for equity and inclusion as well. I think it's really important that that be an important piece of the next phase. Of course, obviously critical to have continued support for businesses, particularly those that have been most heavily impacted by social distancing. I think critical to have support for individuals that are facing extended unemployment. But we do need to add those states and localities as a key piece of the next round.
Steve, thank you for, and Christy and Tom, for your insightful comments. I have one question relating to all of your responses in the last round, and that is, as we look back over the last 150 years and we look at American land-grant universities and its role in the research and innovation enterprise, and we think about the Hatch Act of 1887 and how it brought together cooperative extension, agricultural experiment stations to really create the kind of revolution that led to the agricultural and the industrial revolution, and of course the very genesis of the land-grant institutions therein. I wonder if we are at that inflection point today, as I listen to the three of you, in terms of, is it time for us to consider a 21st century Hatch Act that brings about the kind of partnership, that cross-sectoral partnership that all three of you are talking about, in order to bridge the divides that our leaders of the institution talked about earlier. So Steve, if I may start with you, and we'll end with Christy and have Tom respond.
Well, that's a heck of a question, Guru. But I think the answer is yes. I really do. I mean, when you look at higher education in the United States, I think it's fair to say has been the undisputed leader of the world for many decades. But our leadership position has really kind of started to fray. I mean, Tom talked about this enormous epidemic issue with completion rates being so much lower than they really should be. And we know when you really look at America's student debt problem, the biggest problem is actually the folks that don't complete and that have this huge burden of this debt without getting the earnings premium that we so often associate with college. So I think your notion of a sort of a new framework, a new sort of era of U.S. leadership, I think in higher education is absolutely on target. But I think we need to make sure that it's sort of comprehensive in its scope. We've got to deal with completion rates. We've got to deal with better helping students to launch, when they finish college. We need to develop a more stable funding structure for public higher education in the United States. Higher ed has typically been the sector that's most heavily impacted when there are economic downturns. Unfortunately, at the very time when its role becomes even more essential, I think we've got to find ways to really support research in our public higher education institutions to a greater extent than we do today. And I think we've got to find a way to be able to both kind of recommit to the liberal arts and the sort of fundamental general skills development role of higher education, but also make sure that we're doing a better job of meeting the needs for computer science grads, for data science grads, for sort of some of those targeted fields that are really essential to our economic competitiveness. I love the challenge. And if you think about Virginia's role in higher education in the United States, I think we really have the potential to represent, to sort of be an exemplar for the country and perhaps show the way forward.
Thank you, Steve. Tom, would you like to weigh?
Sure. When I was prepping for today, I had an instinct you might ask about the Hatch Act of 1887. I'm not sure I know what it is, but I think I know where you're going, which is, I think one of the most impressive things about American economic history is how we have invested in education around times of job transition. So, and the Industrial Revolution caused the destruction of massive numbers of small farming jobs. And it was coincident with that we made the investment in the land grant and many other colleges. We came out of World War II and we invested in the GI Bill and the effort of putting a bunch of people in school. And I think if you buy at all that this pandemic situation will have a life beyond, the current couple of months, which, I fear it might, then you have to be thinking about this, the implications on all these workers who have been displaced and how do we do it? And I think a creative angle that talked about getting folks educated, trained, enabled to take their place in the economy. If you do believe that this health crisis is going to have some duration, then I think you have to believe that those kind of investments make good sense.
Thank you, Tom. Christy, you're bringing up the rear here for us.
Oh, thank you. I think you're going to shut off my video because I've been having a little bit of challenges there with my connection. I am in a very urban part of the state, so broadband challenges are ubiquitous apparently. I would just add to that I think thinking about land-grant universities, the ability for higher education to have tentacles into all parts of the state, and then really thinking about what role does that mean for where we are currently in terms of geographic inequities. So is there a role potentially for higher education, which obviously sort of is the underscored theme here for the overall vibrant Virginia, but really thinking about what are the opportunities to continue to bridge the urban-rural divide by having a more active role in understanding what the industry needs are throughout the state or throughout a region, and helping to bridge those needs, whether it's through skills alignment, convening industry, ensuring that there are internships and other supports for students, but really playing a key role in helping to bridge the urban-rural divide by having active support and capacity building for those rural parts of the state, particularly rural economic development organizations that may be more limited.
Thank you, Christy. With those questions from me, I'm going to now turn things over to Mr. Leland Shelton, who will be posing questions from the audience. And if I could just ask the audience members if they could send their questions directly to Leland, and he will bring those to the attention of the panelists. Leland, over to you, my friend.
Yes. Our first question is, what's the strongest barrier to broadband development? Is it money? Is it technology infrastructure? For example, the terrain and impacts? Or is it incumbent resistance? Or perhaps something else?
Well, I would say my friend Liz Povar has hit on all the big obstacles. I do think the biggest one is just really political will, because the amount of money that's involved now, while substantial, is really relatively small compared to the enormous benefits that it would provide. And by the way, this is a place where there's some good news in Virginia, you know, particularly there were some early efforts prior to Governor Northam's term, but during his term, we've seen the biggest increase in real investment going into broadband across the Commonwealth. And that was actually getting set to double again, roughly double again with the next budget coming up. We currently, once the General Assembly is able to, I guess, reallot, if you will, the dollars that were inserted into the biennium budget with the General Assembly's support and the governor's support, we would be on track in Virginia to get to near ubiquitous broadband in roughly 7 to 8 years. So it's a good story. Would love to see it go faster, but it's long overdue. But the good news is our state leaders really have embraced it. And I think they're essentially working to address all the issues that Liz highlighted.
And I'll just add, you know, there's not a barrier to broadband because people are trying to stop broadband. There's a barrier because, you know, like any last mile issue, you've got economics issues. As Stephen said earlier, you've got affordability issues. You've obviously got terrain related cost issues. One of the things that's been interesting to me as I've been talking about this issue is there is a lot of money out there for broadband, but there's nowhere near as much money out there as needs to be out there to deliver it everywhere. And so there's a little bit of a, you know, fingers pointing the other direction. For example, I think at the federal level, there's, I think, $20 billion that's been allocated for broadband, which is a huge amount of money. Now it's been allocated over 10 years, you know, not immediately. And it's been allocated to places that, according to certain, you know, guidelines, have zero broadband. Well, if you've got, you know, one main road that's been deployed, but all of the remote areas of a district haven't been deployed, it doesn't qualify for the money. And so that money hasn't been put out there. And so I think there's some, I think a scrappy community really working hard against the money that's out there can get access, you know, first in the libraries and the public squares, later in the rest of the thing. But it takes a lot more work than I think any of us would want to have to do. And I think that's really where the magic's going to be. If we can help those communities, you know, break down all the barriers to get the money that has been allocated into the places where it's needed.
Thank you. Our next question. What are some of the statewide benefits of building connections between urban and rural communities? And that question was kind of directed directly at Christy.
Hey there. Yeah, we've done quite a bit of research on the economic benefits in particular of urban and rural connectivity. What we've seen specifically are a couple of things. Notably, when more rural communities as well as urban communities are connected to their regional economies in a very strong way, we're seeing increased income growth throughout those local communities. And again, that's a benefit both for urban communities and rural communities, which, you know, oftentimes I think, you know, particularly from a planning as well as other perspectives, bringing more urban communities on board with regional planning tends to have challenges because the benefits may not appear to be coming to urban communities as much as they're going to rural communities. So I think showing the evidence that there are benefits to rural and urban connections that are benefiting urban areas directly is a strong case. I think we've seen this in Virginia throughout time, particularly thinking about, Northern Virginia, a lot of the large government contracts and bigger businesses that are looking for opportunities to stay within the state when it comes to data security, as well as research centers, and branching out to different parts of the state, particularly rural parts of the state, to bring that economic activity there so that it's sort of in close proximity to Northern Virginia, but obviously there are opportunities for rural communities to take on those economic activities. So building those bridges economically between urban and rural parts of the state are going to be critical. I think this will be something that will be an ongoing conversation, particularly as supply chains have been disrupted along a whole host of industries. What are the opportunities within the state, particularly to bridge the urban-rural divide, to help strengthen and create more resilient supply chains? That would be a conversation I think would be a great one to have over the next, in the coming months.
Thank you. Stephen, Tom, would either of you would either of you like to add to that?
I think Christy covered it pretty well. We'll just add that we are seeing, telework was one of the fastest growing segments of employment in the United States even before the pandemic. And while certainly I think we're all hoping to eventually get back to our normal environments, I do think there's going to be some level of a permanent shift, and some companies moving toward more telework, some moving to more of a hybrid model, certainly a large portion moving to more of an openness toward telework. That is a trend that's going to be explicitly beneficial to rural areas, smaller metro areas that have residential broadband access. So this is something that obviously would benefit those areas. It actually also benefits the companies that are headquartered or have operations in higher cost, large, dense urban areas where they can have some of their operations done for somewhat lower cost. Some communities and regions in Virginia have already positioned themselves to benefit from this. One good example is the Roanoke Regional Partnership has an initiative they've been doing that's really gotten some traction. I think it's called Live Here, Work Anywhere, Play Everywhere, I believe. Would encourage you to go to their website and check that out.
Thank you. Another question just came in. What strategies work best in connecting communities to college students to provide, provide support in college completion rates?
Well, I put the topic on the table, so I'll give it a start. One of the schools that I've been intrigued with is Western Governors. Western Governors is an online school. And you would think an online university would have significantly lower completion rates than, one with a physical presence. But their completion rates actually are, near the top of the scale, I think in the 70+% range. And what I understand of what they do is, pretty sophisticated, I'll call it mentoring and follow-up that is data enabled. You know who's logged on, you know who hasn't, you can track and monitor who's participating in schools the way you want to. And my understanding is they assign people behind them to do that. So when you say community, I think a community thought broadly, the academic community. I think there is something to a mentoring and follow-up process, perhaps technology enabled in ways we haven't done before. That does give you a cleaner and better sense of who's where they are, and then provides tailored support for those who need it. I'll also add, at least as I talk to people who run universities whose students are more lower income, a lot of times it has to do with money, and it's not just the tuition money; it's also the money of the family behind. And so often trying to understand the whole life situation of the student allows you to come up with solutions. And I've been pretty intrigued with some of the things I've heard in places Garrett County, Maryland has a program, for example, where they're sort of tracking the entire family and trying to get them through that community college. I just think it's pretty interesting.
I would just briefly add, agree with Tom's points. I would briefly add that I also think for those institutions that largely serve or at least serve a large portion of high school graduates in their communities and region, one of the opportunities for improvement in many areas is just ensuring that the high school graduation requirements align well with what is required for success in those local institutions. And ideally that high school students have an opportunity to sort of assess how well prepared they are, well before the time they get to their senior year.
Great. And I would just add, just want to underscore a comment from Steve earlier about the opportunities once students are enrolled, ensuring that the courses and the curriculum are aligned with the needs of the economy that they're operating in, and that there also are opportunities for students to have internships and other opportunities to engage directly with industry. That has obviously proven hugely beneficial and will help, I think, continue to provide the drive and motivation for students who want to enter those fields, understand specifically what skills they need, and help keep them on the path to graduation.
Thank you. This is the follow-up question from the what strategies work best in connecting communities to college students to provide support and college completion rates. The follow-up was, particularly in rural areas, is there a role to leverage young retirees to follow up mentoring programs?
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
We have another question from a Radford University student. I'm a design thinking MFA student at Radford University. I am in the process of launching my own creative marketing, design, and research studio in Radford, Virginia. What opportunities and challenges do you see for growth in the creative economy sector and social entrepreneurship during this time?
Hey, this is Christy. Thinking particularly about more rural parts of the state, I think there are some challenges with economic diversification and understanding what the underlying economies are. And for a longer term strategy, obviously this isn't specific to a student, but thinking more broadly about how the role of universities in helping to diversify what is happening within a local economy, particularly by connecting it with more urban parts of the state. That I think can have clear connections to enabling a stronger creative economy. We already talked about broadband, the Roanoke initiative to help bring creative types and others from all over the state into more rural parts of Virginia, to allow them to be in a place that potentially would allow them to be more creative, but also engage with the broader economy within the state. So there are a lot of, I think, variables that go into it. So it's a great question. But I think, again, it comes back to, are there opportunities to increase economic differentiation and to increase the ways that urban and rural are connected?
I might add, design, creativity and design thinking is absolutely a great place to be. You're lucky to be and smart to be doing it. I think it kind of reemerged in sort of American commerce around Apple, and people think of it very much as product. But there's just a crying need for a rethinking of service design. So if you run an airline, or if you run a nursing home, or if you run a restaurant, and you think that there's any duration to the notion that distance is going to matter and cleanliness is going to matter, you've got to think about how do you redesign your whole service operation. The restaurant industry is not going to be profitable just sitting people outside at 6 feet apart and trying to do everything else they did the same. They're going to have to rethink the whole operation. And it's not just about money, it's also about customer experience. People aren't going to come if they don't feel like they've got something comparable to the experience. So I just encourage you to think hard as you look at your design and you apply your creativity and how we can change a lot of the services that never had as part of their governing thought that they might have this kind of health paradigm to work against.
Thank you. One more question coming in. With more limited F2F opportunities in K-12 settings ahead, what are your thoughts about engaging with these educational readiness partners, especially that are facing many challenges to support younger students and their staff?
Well, I don't have the answer, but it's a super important question. And I think in general, one of the great challenges facing K-12 and higher ed leaders right now is how to transition to having all or more learning being provided online. Hopefully we're all going to learn more here about how we can better serve students when we have to move to those environments, but I just mostly would just endorse the question as a super important one.
Yeah, well said.
We have another question. Last month's Chev's survey, we learned that 76% of four-year college students face challenges to mental health during the COVID-19 crisis. What do opinion leaders need to combine, what do opinion leaders need to do to combine health, wellness, and education funding and resources to address these staggering survey results?
Again, here I don't have the answer, but I would, a couple thoughts I would share. I think one is I've really come to appreciate the critical importance of mental health as part of healthcare and making sure that it's appropriately funded in the broader scheme, both public provided healthcare or publicly funded healthcare and privately funded healthcare. I think also I do think in general that there are probably opportunities for colleges to improve how mental health is thought about among students. In other words, thinking of it as trying to move away from a stigma that's often there, that a lot of times people really need help. They need to seek help from mental health providers. And I think do not feel comfortable doing that. And so part of it is making sure that it's properly funded and it's made really clear that it's available. But I think part of it also is finding ways to reduce the stigma associated with seeking help from mental health providers.
And I just say that's a horrifying number, 76%. But as Stephen was talking, I was kind of thinking about it. You're a college senior who had a job and now you don't anymore. You're a college freshman or sophomore, with your first sense of freedom, all of a sudden being sent home, back to prison, as my daughter called it. You're being told to learn online, and that's not a method you're comfortable with, or God forbid, one you can't afford or one you can't execute against from a broadband standpoint. And as I thought about it, I don't know how to disaggregate the numbers, but they did kind of add up. But it's really a sad number.
Yeah. Hey, this is Christy. I mean, the one thing I would add, I think the whole piece of that was striking to me, is that this experience, particularly for college students, when college students are in campus, potentially some of the disparities are not as evident or obvious. But moving to the circumstances that we're in right now, and as Tom mentioned, coming back to where you live, where your family is, where you may have other challenges within your family, economically and so forth, as well as lack of access to broadband. All of those disparities come right to the forefront, and clearly that's a continuing challenge that students, particularly students of color, will have to face. Just want to add that to the conversation, that has been sort of a striking feature of this, particularly as it relates to college students.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. My father is the vice president for a fiber optics company and is currently working to install the Tesla charging stations along I-81 and I-77. Are there grant opportunities for companies that could work with citizens and other broadband partners to increase these services?
Sadly, I don't know, but I suspect somebody on the line may know.
I do think that the arc of history moves in a very long direction, and I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a lot more electric vehicles as opposed to gas-powered vehicles for both efficiency and climate reasons. So that's a pretty good place to be. I'm a big fan of I-81, so I think there'll be a lot more traffic on that north-south as the years go on, and we build up many of the economies that surround it. So I think that's a good place to be. So I think that is a very interesting place. The challenge, of course, is the innovation and evolution of technology. And so whether 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, that's how we're going to be deploying for electric vehicles, or it's going to be a different model, that's I think to be seen.
Yeah, I'll leave it to my colleagues there, but yeah, I think to the extent that private sector partnerships are on the table to help provide solutions, that clearly is the direction that we need to go.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have time for one last question. Exposure to and experience in different parts of the Commonwealth, especially in rural areas, where there trends to be significant misunderstandings about rurality, benefits students and communities. What programs exist and what programs can be created to send our college students to gain work experience in those areas that needs an infusion in intellectual capital the most?
Hey, this is Christy. I believe I've heard it. I think there are programs in Virginia right now that are doing exchange programs of sorts with universities in different parts of the state. I'll let my colleagues talk to that who are in higher education, but that seems to be an excellent way for students who may not be familiar with more rural communities or the opportunities and assets that rural communities provide to really get a firsthand understanding of what it's like to live and work in different parts of the state. You could think as opposed to doing a study abroad semester, you would do a study within the state, but just in a different part. So I recall hearing about that, and I think it was through Virginia Tech, but it seemed like a very forward-thinking program to address that issue head on.
Okay, that concludes all the time. Thank you so much for allowing us to ask those questions, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
On behalf of Virginia Tech and all our partner institutions, here's a virtual applause to all the panelists that served on the first round here. Tom, Steve, Christy, thank you very much for your active engagement. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Dennis Tracy. Dennis is no stranger to those of us that live and work in the Blue Ridge, west of the Blue Ridge. He is a diehard Hokie, was the former president of the Smithfield Foundation, has served for many years on the Virginia Tech Board of Visitors, and has also served as the rector of the Virginia Tech Board. And it is a great privilege of mine now to turn things over to Mr. Dennis Tracy.
All right, hold on, there we are. Can you hear me? All right, good. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the chance to moderate this great panel. That last one, Guru, was quite interesting and hit a lot of themes that I hear about every day. Our panel is going to touch on the university and college aspect of what you just heard. We have 5 presidents. We have Irma Becerra, the president of Marymount University, which is located in Arlington. We've got Robert Sandell, president of Virginia Western Community College, which is in Roanoke. We have John Angler, the president of James Madison University in Harrisonburg, and Donna Henry, the chancellor of UVA at Wise. And if you think about that, these presidents span completely different geographic regions within our Commonwealth. And it's going to be quite interesting to hear what they have to say. I can tell you as a member of the Board of Visitors at Virginia Tech, most of these presidents have been focused on what to do with the incoming students, whether to have a fall semester, whether to be online or offline or in person, or how are they going to adjust to the new health concerns and other concerns that have been presented to them with the incoming class. You know, but it occurs to me that many people rely on universities other than just students. They are economic engines in their individual communities. They have many employees. Businesses and government rely on them to be partners as they move forward with innovation that's important for this Commonwealth. The business community in particular has singled out higher education as a centerpiece of many of the initiatives you heard about in the prior panel. The Chamber of Commerce has published a blueprint for Virginia with education right smack in the center. The goal of Stephen Moret and of the governor and of all the business groups is to remain the #1 state in America to do business. The Virginia Economic Development Partnership talks about higher education really more than anything else. All of Virginia business talks about workforce development. There are concepts of education and business partnerships in the Go Virginia legislation, the G3 initiative, the Virginia Business Higher Education Council and the Virginia Business Council all talk about higher education. So it is an important partnership between the business community, government, and the universities, and I'm anxious to hear what they have to say. So panelists, welcome. Everybody has their camera on. I now see you. That's a good thing. And I'm going to start with a general question for each of you. President Becerra, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. Please share with us your thoughts and insights about the next few years in higher education in terms of the impact of the pandemic, and also let me add impact of the current state of I guess unrest in certain parts of our Commonwealth. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And how has your own strategic planning and thinking changed? President Becerra?
Thank you, Trustee Tracy. Even before the pandemic, higher education analysts have been warning us for years that there is a stagnation in the number of high school graduates, and that would have a significant effect on all universities' enrollment across the nation. This stagnation period started back in 2013 and is expected to continue until 2023, and the predictions were pretty scary. We've also seen across the nation a decline in college student enrollment by around 11%. So a number of things have contributed to this. One is a declining population, which has resulted in a declining percentage, not percentage, but a declining number of high school graduates, and which is more significant in some demographics than others. For example, the declining high school graduates is more significant amongst white students. Among Black students, it's about flat. And the only demographic where we see a rise in high school graduates across the nation is the Hispanic group. So every university leader has had their eyes on these statistics with the understanding that, you know, we're all competing for students in one way or another. So it's become very competitive among us, friends sitting here in this panel. And I think it's clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about additional challenges. There are many students that are unsure if they're gonna come to college or take a leap year this fall. We have surveyed our students at Marymount, and many were very thankful that we were able to pivot and move our classes online for the spring and for the summer in a very short period. We moved 700 courses online at a university that there are very few courses that were online prior to the COVID. But they have told us that if we were going to offer online classes only in the fall, they would not come. because they would rather take a gap year or postpone until spring because their preference is to study face-to-face. So given these student preferences, we're preparing to come back in the fall. And I have a picture of Marymount campus in the fall, which is beautiful. So I want to try to bring back that image. But we are also prepared to pivot again if necessary and if we need to, given the environmental conditions, offer classes in a hybrid or online mode of delivery. We will be prepared to do that. We're also, like my colleagues, structuring the fall semester in a way that students won't have to return to campus after the Thanksgiving break, because we understand that that will minimize the potential for contagion. We also understand that this pandemic has also affected people financially. So between the losses of jobs and furloughs, and in particular, we know that our graduate school population may feel additional pressure. Some of them being heads of families, they may want to wait or, wait to see if they get rehired or if they brought back to their jobs. So they may be waiting to see if their personal financial situation becomes more stable. So what do we do? As we face all these challenges, we have tried to create new opportunities. So we have been aggressively providing new opportunities for adult learners to upskill themselves. It's a set of new programs called Upskilling for the New Economy. And we've launched cybersecurity and data science and digital health and digital transformation entrepreneurship, project management, stackable certificates, all of them that could stack up according to students' preferences to a new master's degree. And we call this preparing students to the what's next economy. For undergraduate students that want to, for example, maybe they studied biology or history and they want to get a nursing degree. We know how this nation very much needs nursing graduates. We have a one-year intensive student, we call it second degree, so that you can reskill into a job market, if I may, like nursing or cybersecurity, and enter the job market in an area that our country needs you very much. So we have been paying close attention to what our country needs, what our community needs, and we have been telling our students there's never a better time to be in college than now. So take the opportunity, prepare yourself, and prepare yourself for your future.
That's great, thank you. So you're targeting, that's really interesting. President Sandell, how about you? In the Roanoke region, and especially with the community college system, how's this affecting you, and what are your thoughts?
Well, when the pandemic hit America, I would say that we were well positioned at Virginia Western, if not completely prepared for the devastation it would inflict. Fortunately, we have a strong technological infrastructure and capabilities at Virginia Western. We have a full teleworks network. We were able to have all our employees go home, be able to work from home just like they are in their office. And that worked very well for us. We did have an established continuity of operations plan, a COOP plan in place, and a strong team of leaders that came together immediately to respond. And that's one of the greatest things about this for me, is that our people came together and responded to this pandemic in a very positive way, really geared toward helping our students as much as we could. And finally, we had employees, faculty, and staff who are willing and able to adapt quickly. And at community colleges, we do that. We change on a dime and do anything we could to help our students succeed. So what we see in the ahead is we were able to transition a community college, the majority of our spring enrollment of over 6,000, our spring enrollment classes online. So about 85% of our classes went online, and through consistent outreach and support, the key thing for us was we saw most of our students remain enrolled and on track. So my hat's off to my faculty and staff of how we work with our students. We kept all of our people on track and enrolled. That's a big deal. When you have a lot of community college students that have difficulty getting online and doing those things, we had to do a lot of work to get them with the access they needed. Now, the biggest issue for community college has been the ability to hold face-to-face classes and labs. We have a strong array of career technical programs that rely hands-on learning with the many healthcare programs that we need students to work with patients in close proximity. So you know, at a community college, we have a lot of STEM programs, we have a lot of labs, we have a lot of culinary programs, we need kitchens, we have clinicals, we have about the third largest number of healthcare programs in the Commonwealth and community colleges, and our core trade programs, we have to do hands-on. So that's been very difficult for us. So we had to put those experiential learning opportunities on hold with plans to resume them the second half of the summer, which will start in a couple of weeks, the second half, with appropriate healthcare and safety protocols in place. So our college has responded well. We've met our student needs in a very unusual fashion for us, 85% online. We've had great retention, and I'm going to mention later in another question, what this has done is our summer enrollment has increased, and we see the trend for our fall enrollment increasing, which may be unique. So that's how we're responding at this time.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Sounds like you were ready at least in some degree to address something that we're facing today.
Yes.
President Alger, I'm going to turn this to you. By the way, I mispronounced your name at the beginning, and I apologize for that. I had written it in old-fashioned cursive on the piece of paper in front of me, and I know exactly how to pronounce it, and I'm getting it right now. President Alger, tell us about JMU. How has this current state of the play affected you and your thinking now and moving forward?
Thank you, Dennis. It's great to be with all of you this morning. Like all of you have already heard, certainly the pandemic produced some unprecedented financial challenges for all of us in higher education. All of our revenue streams are challenged right now. Enrollment and tuition, state support, private fundraising took a hard hit at a very time when there is, I think, going to be a greater need than ever for what we do. Like you've heard from my colleagues here, our students really do prefer the face-to-face method of instruction when and where it's possible. Now, we have lots of online programs even before the pandemic, certainly, but we did hear from the vast majority of our students that they do want to return in person in the fall. That's, of course, what all of us have been working on over this summer. But when you think about the immediate impact, we froze tuition for a second straight year and had to pivot to an emergency fundraising campaign to support students whose financial circumstances have changed. We had a program called Madison for Keeps that raised over $750,000 by the end of May, which will provide immediate relief to hundreds of students so that they can come back to school. But when you think about the community impact, as we heard on the earlier panel, we are also the largest economic engine and employer in the Northern Shenandoah Valley region. So we take our role as an anchor institution very seriously, and we have a strategic plan that is focused on what we call engagement with ideas and the world. And as part of that role, we had to figure out, how do you continue your strong commitment to community engagement in a virtual environment? And I'll provide more examples of that later. But when you think about strategic planning, Dennis, you asked about how we think going forward. We added a new strategic priority to our strategic plan on recovering and learning from the pandemic, which will include a focus on innovation going forward. And even as we were doing all the contingency planning, I appointed a task force to focus on post-pandemic learning and innovation, which has already shared a broad set of recommendations on issues such as use of technology, tech support, strengthening online education options, streamlining business practices, telework, virtual events, et cetera. And then finally, you mentioned, of course, that we're actually dealing with multiple crises right now in higher education and in society. The pandemic itself had already brought to the fore a whole series of equity issues, access to broadband, as we heard earlier, and education, healthcare, and the social safety net, all of these that need to be addressed going forward as we do our strategic planning. And specifically to these racial equity issues, which are roiling the country right now, I'm a big believer that it's not enough just to make statements, that our actions matter. And so from the very beginning of this process, we have taken a fresh look at actions that already were in place in our strategic plan and what could be added when you think about recruitment of faculty, staff, and students, when you think about providing financial access to the institution, when you think about the curriculum and the voices that we hear from in leadership. So we're taking a lot of action steps as we go forward, and that will be a critical piece of our strategic plan in the future.
That's great. Thank you so much. Sounds like you've done a lot of thinking on this, and I'm sure all of you have. Chancellor Henry, glad to see you.
Thank you for being here.
Welcome to the crowd. And we're on the question about the pandemic and perhaps even broader, the current state of the play with unrest in the country. We're wondering your views on the next few years for higher education, given what is happening in our country and around the world. What are you seeing and hearing? And also, how's it affected your strategic planning and thinking at UVA-Wise?
Well, certainly, you know, and I spent part of my higher education career in Florida, and there, as a new department chair, dealt with Hurricane Andrew and then several hurricanes along the way. And while that closed institutions, and we had to do outreach to students to support their ability to come back to school, once the event was over, it really became about healing. And I find the difference now with the pandemic is sort of the unknown that we're dealing with. You know, this is the longest period of time where we've had to, you know, pivot really directly on how we deliver higher education to students, which, you know, everyone did across the Commonwealth in March. And, you know, moving to distance learning, and then really planning for fall with continued unknowns about how the virus is going to respond and react. So, you know, the guidance that we have from the governor, I think, is helping us to plan. We're trying to be as flexible as we can at UVA-Wise, and are working with faculty so that they can plan a course that will start face-to-face, and if needed, pivot in good ways where students are prepared and understand what that digital pivot will look like later in the fall. But we're very excited to bring students back to the college campus. You know, we are a residential community, and you miss all of the activities around the life of an academic campus, the speakers that you bring to campus, and the events and the concerts and all of those things. So we're looking forward to getting some of that normalcy back. And with the recent racial strife across the country, you know, I think we in WISE have been planning. We do have a multicultural institute. We have several students who have internships and are working with UVA-Wise so that we can be a better institution, and to be thoughtful about our students of color, and that in our interactions with our community. So we will continue that work. I don't know whether anyone has shared previously, but the Commonwealth this year is very interested, and we have all submitted plans to SHEV about diversity and equity on our campuses and what our plans going forward are. And through the Council of Presidents, we have now a working group that is really looking at planning and how we can, as institutions, come together to support students of color, and to ensure that we have good systems in place in that work, not only on our campuses, but with our communities where we're situated. So I think all of that is good work. And then with strategic planning, UVA-Wise, when I joined the college in 2013, we finished our E2020 strategic plan. And now we're in 2020, so we are in the midst of working on a new strategic plan. And while our mission really remains to provide an excellent education and to serve our community and the nation, affordability and access really remain a strong focus of our mission. And if anything, I think that's so critical right now with the economic downturn nationally. Southwest Virginia, as a rural area, has been working very hard to turn that corner. And we're making good progress, and we're really working hard within our region to ensure that progress continues. We are one of the largest and most diverse employers in our region, and the work that we do to support the economy is important in that regard as well. So in strategic planning, we have been focused on degree programs, certificate programs, ways that we can work to encourage other employers to look at us in good ways. I think that a virtual workforce actually is beneficial to Southwest Virginia. If we can train students who want to live in this region and work virtually, and they will be hired by companies, I think that that's important. So I think that's where we are with that, and I'll turn it back to you, Dennis.
That's great. Thank you very much. Very interesting from all of the panelists. And there are a lot of challenges. You are addressing them. You have plans. It sounds like you're moving forward. That's wonderful. The theme of this particular panel also has to do with economics. It has to do with what several of you mentioned, the fact that your institutions themselves are economic engines in your communities, as well as partners with others to better the economy and better the community. And my question is, what do higher education partnerships look like in your region of the state? And what is your university or college doing with those partnerships? And President Becerra, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, Trustee Tracy. First, I wanted to address a quick, very important question that you asked me in the prior question, and I wanted to take the moment to say that we at Marymount are also, the whole effort of diversity and inclusion is one that was part of our strategic plan, even before the most recent well, I call it a civil rights crisis that we've had, the one since 1968 that we're also experiencing now. And the whole effort of diversity and inclusion, we're starting a series of conversations across campus. We're calling it Real Talk and Courageous Conversations at Marymount. And these talks are going to inform an action plan that will be, again, informing our strategic plan, including efforts to continue to diversify our faculty and how Marymount will emerge out of this crisis a stronger institution. So I just wanted to make sure that I have a quick moment to address that very important part of the question you asked before.
Great.
In terms of partnerships, you may or may not know, I joined Marymount in July of 2018. And since then, I have been working feverishly to form partnerships with other universities, as well as with corporations and nonprofits. And we've talked about all kinds of joining forces, from creating new programs to creating pathways among institutions. We last year bought a condo, a luxury condo called the Rixie, and we reached out to a number of institutions, namely George Mason and Virginia Tech, because we figure out that Arlington becoming pricey, students sometimes, in particular graduate students that may or may not want to live on campus and they want to be in a condo environment, a more independent environment with their families, they struggle to find affordable housing. So we extended the opportunity to other students in the region to also live together with our saints at the Rixie. We have developed partnerships with corporations to launch new degree programs. For example, a palliative care certificate in collaboration with Opus Care Corporation. We also have partnerships for internships, a new internship program with Amazon and others. We joined forces with MITRE to develop modules on how artificial intelligence will change every discipline. And those modules are now part of different courses from health profession to fashion design. Our physical therapy program is a longtime partner with MedStar, and we're even co-located in the same building at 4041st Fairfax Drive, and our students work with MedStar patients for their clinicals. We have a new engineering program in collaboration with the University of North Dakota to serve the needs for high-tech workforce in the region. And we are in conversations with George Washington, Virginia Tech, my colleagues here, and this panel to see how we can explore pathways, how we can best integrate our areas of expertise, and how we can better create opportunities to help prepare the workforce that Virginia needs to continue to sustain as a leader and continue to rebuild its economy.
That's great. Sounds like you got a lot going on up there. President Sandell, I know that you have a lot going on as well in the Roanoke region. What is Virginia Western doing in the way of partnerships?
We are very fortunate to have a wide array of higher education partners to work with through the pandemic. We work with business and industry in so many different ways. In terms of other higher education institutions, our biggest partners are our sister colleges within the Virginia Community College system. We have always collaborated and bounced off issues and ideas with one another. But if anything, this pandemic has brought us closer together. We've had 23 colleges pretty much independent, but the pandemic has pulled us together to work in unison. Under the leadership of our chancellor, we have harnessed the power of all 23 institutions working together to develop policies, protocols, and enhance purchasing to deal with the pandemic. We also have strong relationships with our four-year universities throughout the state. Students who start at Virginia Western and transfer to a four-year college are usually more successful than those who start right out of high school. And the point of that being is, even during the pandemic, we were able to continue our Associate of Art and Associate of Science transfer programs. So those folks got to graduate this spring and they'll be going on to their next step. So we were proud to get all that done. We're also proud of our guaranteed admissions agreements with so many colleges and believe that students starting here and finishing there will continue to benefit both sides of the agreement. And one thing about the community colleges, we have the largest percentage of minorities of all the higher education institutions throughout Virginia. And we work hard to make that continue and to grow that in the future. Community colleges are uniquely positioned in that the majority of our students come from our region, and that's the beauty of the community college. And I think until the pandemic is resolved, I see many reasons why students would prefer to stay close to home for their first 2 years if they're planning to attend a four-year university. And some of those reasons may be their health and safety considerations, as well as housing and, of course, affordability. Community college tuition is less than 1/3 of our four-year universities in the state, an important distinction in this time of economic upheaval. If you got millions of people unemployed, money is going to be a big deal. And that's going to be a big consideration about people and about where they go to school. And you can look at that with our, I mentioned earlier about our summer enrollment. We aren't going down in the community college. Summer enrollment is taken off and actually at the highest levels in years. It's a number of our colleges. Also, the trend for the fall seems to be going in a very strong, positive manner. And also, in addition to student population, we have the adult student population, which considers about almost half of our number of students, will continue to be vital for us, as many of them will continue to be out of work and looking to build skills that are relevant to the new economy. And that's where community colleges can respond quickly to help these folks that are out of work. We have to provide ways to gain hands-on training in order to start a new career. And something the new community colleges can do, we can start short-term certifications and career readiness certificates at any moment. And we can respond quickly to the people and the needs of our community and our business and industry partners. These are many of the types of things that we're doing as a college today to move ahead in the region and in Roanoke. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. You know, in my business world, we had many partnerships with community colleges, and you're right, very nimble, very adaptive, able to provide business community and others with what they need in the way of workforce skills.
Yeah, quick turnaround.
Yeah, very quick turnaround. And I also will add that the transfer program has worked very well. One of our former rectors at Virginia Tech is a transfer from a community college to Virginia Tech. And she was a wonderful rector and a great representative of the transfer student.
It does work. So, it's great to have that happening.
It is. Thank you. President Alger, Tell us about JMU, tell us about Harrisonburg and beyond as far as partnerships, which I know you have.
Thank you, Dennis. And that question really does go to the heart of our vision that I mentioned earlier of engagement with ideas and the world. And one of the first things I think that's worth remembering is that colleges and universities play an important convening role because we can bring together talent and expertise from higher education, business, and our community. So something that we had already done was to develop a new community coordinating council to provide more structure for these partnership efforts going forward. But specifically with regard to the pandemic, we pivoted very quickly with our community partners, regional economic development offices in several ways. We have something called the Harrisonburg-Rockingham Business Resilience Task Force that we created, which developed a guide on how to reopen businesses in the Shenandoah Valley and oversaw grants to local businesses to help them through the pandemic. Another program that we started was called the Rebuild Program for Shenandoah Valley, which developed tools to help entrepreneurs to adapt to the challenges from the COVID-19 crisis. And then a third program that was developed is called Bricks and Clicks for Small Business Recovery, which offers training and technical assistance to help small businesses identify solutions to the COVID-19 challenges. We know that we shouldn't all be reinventing the wheel when it comes to trying to figure out how you respond to the pandemic. So those are some ways in which we work with local businesses. We host a number of entities that serve our region economically, like the Shenandoah Valley Partnership on Economic Development, the Small Business Development Center, a Center for Entrepreneurship, and Virginia Campus Compact, which many of you may know coordinates community and civic engagement initiatives across all of higher education in Virginia, public and private institutions working together. And then in our own region, in Harrisonburg, Rockingham County and beyond, we work with the other schools near us, like Blue Ridge Community College, Bridgewater, and Eastern Mennonite University, with our business leaders on a variety of economic development and community initiatives. Just a couple of examples: the Go Virginia program, many of you are familiar with, which seeds initiatives to produce high-paying jobs for each region. We are currently seeking funds for something called the Startup Shenandoah Valley Project, which would be a virtual acceleration program for entrepreneurs who have scalable business ideas. And we worked with Blue Ridge Community College with Merck, which has a major facility in Elkton, to support a $1.2 billion expansion of its pharmaceutical manufacturing operation right here in Rockingham County. And through that agreement, we agreed to establish a pipeline of biotechnology, engineering, and computer science talent to support Merck as well as other life science industries and manufacturers in our region. And that was supported by a VEDP grant. So I want to thank the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. And the last thing I would say is that because we're educational institutions, we can use our expertise to address real-world problems in our community through the curriculum with things like community service learning and partnerships. We do that in healthcare. We have clinical experiences for students that are providing healthcare in our local community, especially to underprivileged populations. The 2020 census, we've had classes that are working with our community locally. People forget that that's a critical piece of economic recovery going forward. There are $675 billion a year of federal funds tied to census results. And it's also used by businesses to decide where to locate. And we're working through our College of Education on literacy programs, for example, with students, especially young kids that themselves were not able to continue going to school. So every academic discipline can also play a part with economic and community development and recovery.
That's great. I really appreciate it. And Chancellor Henry, we come to you. What's going on at UVA-wise in the way of partnerships?
You know, through our Office of Economic Development, which has been in existence now for about 8-9 years. We moved it into the Chancellor's office about 5 years ago, and the goal there was to elevate those potential partnerships with the community. When I joined the college, the coal industry really was in decline. There was a lot of job loss. Everyone began working together closely to really re-envision what industry in Southwest Virginia should look like. When Go Virginia began, we were asked to serve as the support organization for the Region 1 group, which we did because we felt, like John said, that we're a convener, and hopefully we're an unbiased convener that can help serve all of Southwest Virginia to bring together folks to have those conversations about industry. Where should we head? What is this going to look like? In our work in economic development, we cross everything from, community development to health and wellness. We have a center called Healthy Appalachia, which really does reach out to the community. The Commonwealth has funded a telemental health network that we have convened and oversee here through UVA WISE, which essentially is putting the technology into healthcare centers in Southwest Virginia, but reaching out and connecting to mental health experts across the Commonwealth to increase that access that's so needed in rural Southwest Virginia. So that's, one way that we do some outreach there. During the epidemic, we have actually did a Southwest Virginia talent mobilization initiative. We convene virtual workshops every week and bring small businesses together to bring in subject matter experts that can help them connect to everything from getting the funding for PPE to get the salary funding that they need, to help them understand the access to resources that are available, to really help the region as we move forward through this phase. Additionally, we've worked with all the small towns around the region and working with DHCD have brought in some funds that we can do small grants to the small towns to help them revitalize the littler towns, and to bring people in and to help them attract businesses are some of the ways that we're doing the outreach there. We have found in working with our partners, economic development partners, Southwest Virginia reinvested heavily in broadband. That has really helped our region to move forward. We're still trying to get that last mile in place, which would be extremely helpful as schools have gone to online and to help K-12 with the work that they're trying to do. And I know the Commonwealth is very interested in making that happen. Hopefully the new satellite ways of getting that technology out will help rural areas so that you don't have to put physical broadband across the area. But those are all things that I think are just really important to the region and in our work to make those things happen. In addition, we've attracted some great technology companies here, and through our programs in computer science and software engineering, we've connected students to those companies so that they can do their work, and have helped to strengthen that part of our workforce. And we're hopeful that with Amazon now in Virginia that we can actually be a full partner with the Commonwealth through the Tech Talent Initiative to increase the amount of talent from our region to help supply that demand through all of this. So I really see higher education as helping the Commonwealth to move forward, and I hope that the Commonwealth really views us as partners.
Good. I know that they do. And it's really incumbent upon every university and everybody who seeks a university to come together right now. I'm going to ask our last question and then turn it to questions from the viewers. And I would invite the viewers to submit your questions now. And we only have a few minutes left for this question, so I'd ask each of you to give us a concise answer to this. And it's the now what question. You just described your partnerships. You just described how you really want to have them, and your successes, and the fact that you believe you're a vital part of economic recovery. Given the situation that we're all facing, what are you gonna, you have to be brave to change, and you have to be brave to stay the course now. You have to be brave no matter what you do. So what are you gonna do moving forward as far as partnerships? Do you need to change? Do you need to stay the course? Do you need to get innovative? What are you going to do now? President Becerra.
Thank you, Trustee Tracy. Well, it's clear that the old model of universities, the ivory tower, isolated from everything around it, is no longer the model for today or for tomorrow. So every university is continuing, I'm going to say, stay the course to develop these deep, mutually beneficial partnerships with different community members, other universities, corporations, and nonprofits. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the nonprofit sector because that's one area that Marymount has been very engaged and very important in this moment, that we continue to remain engaged with through our service to the community. Service to others is one of our core values, and all our faculty and our students, we're all in staff, we're all involved in helping the community. For example, our students, they volunteer to do the vitals at the Arlington Street People's Assistance Network. Our faculty, they have a garden that grows produce for their Arlington Food Assistance Center. During this pandemic, we donated our PPE, which now we have to find new PPE for our nursing and our health students because we were left without PPE when our neighbor hospitals needed PPE. We had one physics professor, Dr. Eric Bubar, who has been working with his students and using his 3D printer to create face shields for the community. Our psychology professor, Dr. Linda Gulin, has been providing her expertise to help parents how they can talk to children about the coronavirus, and the list is on. So we, Marymount University, is proving that we are going to continue to help our community recover through these difficult times. I don't know how many of you know, but Marymount is the only university in the whole Commonwealth that is an emerging Hispanic university. And we have students from 75 different countries. So we hope that we continue to strengthen the diversity, find ways that we can really emerge a stronger institution and continue to serve our community, our Commonwealth, our nation, and the world.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
President Sandell.
Thank you.
Now,
yeah, I believe that higher education will continue to play a major role in facilitating economic recovery and innovation. That's what we're all about. But there are many jobs and businesses that will quite simply cease to exist once this is all resolved. As a community college, as I mentioned, we're fortunate to have the ability to adapt quickly to changing times and create relevant programs. And that's one of the things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to put relevant programs out there to meet the needs of industry and business. There may be new jobs related to healthcare, advanced manufacturing, or other essential fields that I think will see a great deal of growth. We see great growth with STEM and biomedical programs, mechatronics, engineering, and the trades. I mean, the skills gap is tremendous in our industries. And we get hit all the time about the skills gap, and we need to fill in those trade positions. As far as innovation, it would be essential for higher education to support individuals who are interested in job creation. At Virginia Western, we have worked for several years with the City of Roanoke and the Roanoke-Blacksburg Technology Council to develop a ramp business accelerator. We have seen great success in helping businesses launch themselves to bigger and better things with the idea that they will stay in the region. We got tired of seeing these creative companies leave and go out of state. So we want them to stay in the New River Valley and in the Roanoke Valley. I think it will even be more important for us to provide the training and support as well as funding opportunities that entrepreneurs and small businesses need. They need our assistance. They're going to be the ones that are going to move forward. They're going to be the ones driving our local economies ahead, and we are bound to help them. And finally, it has always been my philosophy to be open to partnerships with outside organizations, industries, and businesses. We are a key pipeline for employers and have worked hand in hand with economic partnership organizations to recruit and retain businesses. That's what we're all about. We listen to business leaders and bring them together to find out the kind of training they are looking for in an employee. That's what we need to be doing more of. I think that role will continue to grow to even a greater extent in the future. And I think we're going to have to accelerate that now that the pandemic, it seems to be coming to an end, hopefully.
Good. Thank you. President Alger, now what for JMU?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Then now what? Because one of the things that I've talked about for a number of months with our community is that we need what I call a civic renaissance with a greater emphasis on the public good. And that means that institutions like ours should be focusing more than ever on community and civic engagement. For example, with interdisciplinary problem solving classes where our students are working directly with community partners on real world problems. We have a lot of great examples of that. But I think going forward in the now what, our most important national resource, I really do believe, as we seek to recover and prosper, is the potential brain power of our diverse population. So that talent production is going to be key as we work together. That means focusing on some of the growing disciplines of the 21st century, like IT, healthcare, cybersecurity, and by the way, internships for students will be an increasing need that businesses can help us with. And some of those may be virtual in this environment, especially for those of us that aren't surrounded by a lot of Fortune 500 companies in our local communities. Providing access for more students, first generation students. We have an existing program with 7 different local public school districts called Valley Scholars that provides a pathway to higher education with training and mentoring and full tuition scholarships for hundreds of students in our region, but also for individuals whose jobs and industries are changing, those non-traditional adult learners who need to develop new skills. And the last point I would make there is we need to be looking at our programs and delivery modes that meet the needs of the evolving workforce. So for example, online and asynchronous learning opportunities, as well as shorter term certificate programs. It is the opposite of the isolated ivory tower. It's the engaged university going forward.
That's really interesting. Chancellor Henry, we end with you. What are you going to do moving forward?
You know, I think higher education should be viewed as central to the economic recovery and moving beyond where we are. You know, in difficult times, you know, after World War II, during the Industrial Revolution, there were investments in higher education when it was difficult to find funding. And I think that the Commonwealth and the country really need to step up and pour resources into higher education so that we can create the workforce that's needed. We're in the middle of a technology change, and I believe that the pandemic has really ramped that up in different ways. When you look at the way we're purchasing nowadays, the way we're still frequenting our local restaurants through technology, that you can, you know, order your groceries online, all of that has just advanced and sped up. And higher education has to be prepared to have students graduate with those digital technology skills so that they can move into that workforce in ways that are so critical and important. And I think we have the ability to do that. At UVA-Wise, we initiated a platform of digital pads so that our students all have access to the same technology, which frankly made that transition to online learning a lot easier last spring. Those students are now learning skills about how to program using that technology. So that has to happen across all disciplines. As a liberal arts institution, I believe that it's important that our students leave prepared to enter the workforce, and I believe they get those skills. And regarding access, right now, so many people are out of work. We have at least 50% of our students are first generation students at UVA-Wise. Almost 80% of our students receive some form of financial aid. About a third of our students are in the lowest socioeconomic category and get Pell funding. So that access is just so important for those students, and I'd hate to have a lost generation of access because we're not investing in our students and not investing in the aid that they need to continue their educations. So I think that we have to double down. All higher ed across Virginia and the nation need that support so that they can move forward. And I think that that will help us get to be where we need to be and to get past the issues where we are right now.
That's great. I think that's well said. Thank you so much. Leland, do we have questions for our panel from the viewers?
Yes, we do. The first question, in what role do you see design thinking playing in assisting higher education as we navigate and move forward through the uncertainty of our current circumstances? More specifically, at your individual institution, do you currently implement design thinking and or use centered design methodology in your strategic planning process?
I might jump in here, Dennis, with a quick response. We use design thinking quite a bit at James Madison University. We've actually worked with Stanford and their design school in designing some of our academic programs. And we have something here called the X Labs, which are interdisciplinary courses that are team taught by faculty from different colleges at the university. The students come from all different academic majors, and they work on real world problems with community partners and sometimes government partners outside the university. These have been tremendously successful classes. The students love them. They get hands-on experience. And I would also mention that university-wide, we have what we call the ICCE program, Innovation, Collaboration, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship, to try to incorporate design thinking across the entire curriculum. And we actually train faculty in different disciplines to be able to be ambassadors for that kind of work across the university. So it's a core piece of what we're doing going forward.
I can jump in after John, if I may. Love the question. I am an engineer myself, and so is my provost, so we have no absence of design thinkers on the cabinet, but we have launched an initiative for incorporating entrepreneurship into all the majors as a cornerstone and design thinking. And we have a new focus, what we call intrapreneurship, where people, not only it's important that you learn entrepreneurship, not only if you're going to be an entrepreneur, but if you want to be an educator or you want to work in a corporation, because entrepreneurial skills are important no matter what you do. So we also have restructured, for example, our School of Business is a School of Business and Technology. So we do a lot in terms of even structural combinations of our areas of expertise, so that we can address those kind of areas of growth in the market that incorporate different areas of expertise. A certificate of palliative care, for example, which is quality care for the chronically ill and for the elder population, incorporate thinking that cut across health management to social work to how do we deal with grieving. So we are constantly looking at new, let's say, new areas or emerging areas of expertise that cut across different disciplines.
And our concept of design would be that we have real world business and industry leaders who come in and challenge us. They come and challenge our faculty, they come in and challenge our board, how we do our curriculum, how we do the programs we set up. So we try to get the pulse of what's really happening in our region, since we are a community college and responding to the region that we serve. They give us critical input, and a number of our folks go out and work as interns, so forth, in these companies, and it really helps us to get their concepts and ideas about what they really see the real world needs once these students come out. And so we design programs and things around that to make sure that we're being responsive to the community and region that we serve.
And then just to add, in our design thinking, we think about the user, so the student, and when the student leaves, what is the perspective that they need? So in entrepreneurship, we've actually set up a place called the Nest, which is in the center of our community, where our students who are studying entrepreneurship can actually work with community members who are doing work and host them to really brainstorm and connect to that, which helps our economy. It helps our students to grow because they're looking at things from an employer, from someone who's trying to design an entrepreneurial endeavor, so that they're very connected to the region. We've also opened an entrepreneurship center through the Oxbow Center, which is a co-working space where our students have been hired by companies who are startups and entrepreneurial from other parts of the Commonwealth. But our students are working for them in an incubator space where they're exposed to others, so that they're really beginning to think about what does life look like beyond my education at UVA-Wise when I am working. So our design is around that, and we try and include students in our thinking when we're implementing things at the college. So when we implemented the concept of the iPads, we looked at that from the student perspective and how it would impact them. So I would say that's a major component of our design thinking.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions and answers. We will keep these questions and we will answer them as we work forward.
That's great. Thank you, Leland. And I just want to thank the panel. You have been gracious. You have given us your time. You all are doing innovative things, and I feel much better, to be honest about it, after listening to everyone. So thank you for your time. And on behalf of all the viewers, I will applaud, if you can hear that. And thank you again for doing this. And Guru, you want me to turn it back to you?
Thank you, Dennis. What a magnificent conversation. And it reminds me that the Commonwealth of Virginia is indeed the birthplace of the American dream. To see the very origins of our Commonwealth, as it happened 250 miles away from Blacksburg and Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, to see the innovative educational leaders that are bringing to bear the remarkable programs and initiatives that are at play at each of our institutions, and the interconnectedness in terms of the triple helix of the collaboration between industry, government, and higher education is truly remarkable. So thank you for moderating a magnificent panel of leaders. And I want to thank all of the panelists and all of the participants that have joined us today. We had at the zenith of this virtual summit about 192 participants this morning. I want to again thank Dr. John Provost and Dr. Ann Kadabian for their extraordinary leadership in bringing us together. Stay tuned for the next virtual summit that will take place in early fall, perhaps in August or September. There will be an upcoming book on Vibrant Virginia that is being co-authored by several of the panelists that have joined us today, and also that we will make this recording available for the broader audience. And so without further ado, I want to thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend and the rest of Friday. All the best. Thank you again. And I'll join